Reverend Stu, how is it going today?
Hey, I'm going well, Mike. How are you? It's great to see you as always.
Thank you, likewise, and also doing well. Cannot complain. I want to share a letter with you, though. We got a letter from somebody. Can I read it to you?
Yeah, great. Is it like a fan letter or something?
Oh well, let me just read it. It speaks for itself, I think.
Okay.
Your show asks what disclosure means for the individual, not just the government. That question is exactly where I live. In 2009, I suffered a massive heart attack and reached the hospital dead on arrival. I was the first patient in Florida on the cold protocol. My body brought down to freezing. My funeral was planned. I woke up with no memory of what happened, but my compass has never pointed the same direction since. I've been obsessed with the afterlife, with what consciousness actually is, and with where my ideas come from because they no longer feel entirely mine. I hold 20 patents, built the first fully robotic pharmaceutical manufacturing line in the United States, and exited a $100 million company. Then I wrote a novel arguing that NHI, non-human intelligence, has never been in a spaceship. It has been operating through human consciousness for 12,000 years. The science is real and the question is personal. The theological weight of what this actually means for the soul and the evidence trail that is published and peer-reviewed both belong in this conversation. I would love to bring this to your listeners.
The following program is presented for general information, education and entertainment purposes only and is not intended to be advice of any kind. The content, views, thoughts and opinions expressed in this program are those of the individuals involved. The use of information on this program is at the user's own discretion.
That's amazing. That almost describes our podcast. I'm keen for this.
Yeah, I mean, when I read that, I was just like, how can we not talk to this person, right? You know, we've opened it up to basically the world. If you want to join this conversation, if you write a letter like that, you're going to be on that screen real darn quick, right? So, welcome one and all, wherever and whenever you may be. This is Universal Disclosure, meeting the moment. My name is Mike, an active UFO Field Investigator in Southern California, with my friend and co-host,
Reverend Stu in Melbourne, Australia.
Let's just give a little bit more history here of this person. He spent 20 years building things that saves lives. He's got 26 medical devices, 20 patents, the first fully robotic, non-human touch pharmaceutical manufacturing line in the United States. He thinks in systems, and he builds from principles, doesn't speculate, and follows the evidence.
You know what I really like about that, Mike? There's a balance of sort of scientific approaches and esotericism. So this is exactly the conversation I want to have here on this show.
Yeah, I mean, definitely fits right in. So in 2009, he had a near-death experience, and he woke up changed in ways he could not account for and has never been able to explain. And ever since, his compass has pointed inexplicably toward consciousness, the experience of dying itself, and what passing actually means. He spent 2 decades building a $100 million company while quietly pulling on a thread that ran through quantum physics, archaeoacoustics, ancient civilizations, and 12,000 years of human contact with something that has never needed a spaceship. He's not a believer looking for validation. He's an engineer who followed the evidence somewhere uncomfortable and stayed there long enough to write a novel about it. The book, or the novel I should say, The Weight of the Dog, is a hard science speculative thriller that treats disclosure not as a political event, but as a frequency war for human consciousness. The argument underneath is this: the phenomenon has never been external. It's been operating through human consciousness for 12,000 years, not visiting it, operating through it. And when Steven Spielberg's Disclosure Day opens June 12th of this year, every podcast is going to cover it, and most of them are going to ask what happens when they arrive. But this guy wants to have a different conversation about consciousness, non-locality, death, theology, and why the most important question of our time isn't what's in the sky, but what's already in the room. He brings credentials nobody else does to this conversation, and a 20-year silence is finally broken. So he says he's going to reframe the whole argument.
Well, absolutely intriguing. Now, something that piqued my interest there was archaeoacoustics, being a musician. I really want to delve into that one, Mike, with him.
I do too. When I was reading that, I was nervous that I didn't say it right or mispronounced it, but I'm not sure what that exactly is.
My sense is it's got something to do with the resonance of structures, maybe the 432 tuning, music, sound, sound healing. I think that's what it is, but I want to clarify that with our guest.
Okay, that makes sense. So let's learn together, shall we?
As always.
All right, so let's bring them on in. I mean, with that introduction, this is going to be something. Universal Disclosure Podcast proudly welcomes Alex Lucio. All right, Alex, thanks so much for your time and joining us. We are super excited to have a conversation with you today.
I'm glad to be here, and thank you for inviting me.
Absolutely. So now, I want to start out with, well, I've got three questions I want to put out there first. But then before we get to those questions, I want to hear a little bit more about your history. But
Okay.
how long were you frozen? And then how were you reanimated? And how, yeah, I guess those are the two main questions I'm most curious about. But before that, I mean, you've got such an impressive background. If you can just briefly tell us and our listeners who you are, even though we've already talked about that in the intro, I want to get more substance of Alex and such.
Yeah, happy to. So in 2009, I had a massive heart attack. I went for a run, a jog in the morning. An eyewitness said it looked like I decided to go for a sprint and just Superman dive into the air to land on my face. And the rationale for that is when you have forward momentum and your heart stops, you just fall. So I suppose that looked like me just deciding to jump into the air and land on my face. So I was a bloody mess, I suppose, on the pavement. Um, I I got to the emergency room of Advent Health in Central Florida, and I was, as far as from the nurse, I haven't really no way of researching that, but nurse said I was the first patient on this cold protocol, which brings my body temperature down to 2 degrees above the point of freezing. And the 2 degrees is to stop ice crystal formation in your bloodstream. Um, there I sat for 3 days, and both my brothers are physicians. The neurology report, which I have, I actually keep to remember, said that my prognosis was dismal. The recommendation was to terminate life support. The funeral plot next to my mom and dad was purchased by my brothers. The funeral home was alerted that I'd be taken off life support. And that morning, I opened my eyes and extubated myself by just yanking it out of my mouth, which set off the alarm in the nurse's station. And I have no memory of that, except that nothing was the same from that day forward. And for 20 years, I've not talked about this. This is the publication of the book, and I think entering into semi-retirement was the first time that I actually felt that I could talk about this. Because the reason I do that, what I mean by that is I was taken seriously. I mean, maybe I'm not so much anymore, but I was in a profession that required me to be taken seriously. And in the sciences and engineering, there's not a lot of I don't know. It's just put you on the fringe level of things, which I didn't feel the need to put myself out there for that. And I thought to some degree it would hurt me professionally. And the reason for that is that every product idea that I've had in the last 20 years never happened before the event. And I never dreamed before the event. Now quite a lot. And every idea I've had, I literally woke up at like 3 a.m. and jotted it down and went to work. And I can't explain that other than I equate the near-death experience with that happening. And, I talked to a psychologist because at one point I said, I think I might be a little crazy. And he said, no, actually, that's not too uncommon in NDE experiences that I don't know. I've talked to another near-death experience person who had an experience, and they call it a download. And I've never, uh, that whole notion had me very uncomfortable discussing it because literally there are things that have happened that the timing of which is impossible to explain. I started building an IV fluid factory and finished the month that Hurricane Helene took out Baxter's facility in North Carolina, creating this huge IV fluid shortage. I started inventing disinfection devices 6 months before the pandemic hit the United States. I started inventing oxygen devices about a year before the US went into an oxygen shortage. I started with CPAP equipment before Philips was recalled by FDA. And a friend of mine said, how do you catch lightning 3 times?
Yeah.
And I don't have a logical reason for that because I've had this belief for 20 years that every idea I've had is not originated inside my head. And I wake up with the idea. And so that kind of fueled this passion of mine to, I I do an awful lot of thinking about devices and uh, what does the world need at this moment? And I was never comfortable articulating that, some of the inspiration to me felt outside my head. Although, in the arts, that's common. The musician says my muse or the artist says my muse, and that's acceptable. But for an engineer to say, I just get a download from heaven, it sounds crazy, right? But that's the only way I can explain that. A lot of my wife is used to me waking up almost with this feverish rush to write something down before I forget it. She's used to waking up and having me. There's a story that circulates about an air fryer in my home that my wife got up in the morning. It was in pieces on the kitchen floor. And by the way, that's not so much related to the new. That's just my style. Is I'm a tinkerer, and I get inspiration. I'll take something apart to figure it out, and I make a mess, and I usually break stuff. I do an awful lot of making a mess and breaking stuff along the way. But yeah, almost every idea that kind of had legs, I woke up with. Building a factory, I woke up with. Even to the point of writing this novel, which is an outlier for me, was wake up in the morning, you're going to write a novel. And I never, I make it playful, but it's no less true. And I make a joke of it sometimes, but literally I wake up with an inspiration, and I've learned to actually listen to that and write it down and execute it. And every time that's happened, it's done like phenomenal. And so this friend of mine is like, the proof of whether you're crazy or not is whether something actually is real. So if you get an inspiration and it says jump in a lake, that's probably you are crazy. If you get an inspiration that says move your house to tomorrow, and the next day your house disappears, it goes into a sinkhole, that's probably something a little bit different, right? And so I've never, this is probably, I reached retirement. I started writing the novel, and some of this stuff made its way into the novel. So I'm writing fiction, and fiction gave me license to kind of explore some of the themes in my life in a way that, if I tried to write a nonfiction book about my experience, I would go, yeah, that's crazy. But I could definitely put these ideas into fiction work, and then it's just fiction. And that kind of gave me the comfort to kind of, go off off the deep end a little bit. And the themes that it allowed me to deal with in the novel was kind of the historically, I think the NHI phenomena, I refer to it as whisper campaign through human history. And anyway, so that's that. But just to kind of go back to your question, who am I? I started out. I'll just start post near non-death experience. Near death experience. I started a company called 3V Medical, in the CPAP space. And I ended up commercializing 26 medical devices across ventilation, respiration, oxygen, and disinfection. Developed over 20 patents for device invention. Sold that company at the height of the pandemic for an amount of money that almost made me feel guilty. Just because I grew up in poverty, so I grew up dirt poor, and my two brothers and I shared a bedroom all the way through high school. And so when you grow up, in humble means, to all of a sudden, find yourself with that degree of wealth, there's a guilt factor. At least for me, I never felt comfortable. And so what did I do with it? Well, it's like, okay, well, here's this pot of gold. What's next? Let me build something new. And I woke up with the idea to build an IV fluid plant, which is insane because I have no experience in pharmaceutical manufacturing. And yet I built the first fully automated robotic plant in the United States with no human touch. And that company is Assure Infusions. And that's kind of that, and that in itself is somebody's full life. And then 3B Medical, which then got acquired and sold, that's a full life. And I one of the other things that happen is I have this pressing sense of time, compression of time, and the notion that I understand that my days are numbered, and I feel like when I get this idea that it's incumbent to execute at speed, at scale. And what's weird about that feeling is that it always works out. There's a reason for that speed. So I was rushing like crazy to get this IV fluid factory operational. And I don't know if you guys, you're both in the down under.
No, I'm in SoCal here
Okay.
on the coast.
Australia had a massive IV fluid shortage around the same time, and then that made its way to the United States, which was put U.S. hospitals in a difficult position. So I get an idea, I execute it extremely fast. I feel kind of called to do it, and it always goes well. Knock on wood. And then the novel was no different. And the novel premise, if you want to hear it, just because it kind of dovetails into the entire phenomena, I think. So there's the CERN collider has an accident, opens a portal, and two non-human intelligences are about to go through it. One malevolent, one benevolent. So the malevolent one enters a 17-year-old girl, and the benevolent one it wants to pick the humblest of forms, so it picks an arthritic bulldog, English bulldog, and waddles around. So it's kind of a ridiculously, you would think it's a ridiculous concept that the smartest being in the universe decides to come into our reality as an English bulldog, which is interesting in its own right. And the bulldog says, because he plays off of C.S. Lewis's Lion, Witch, and Wardrobe, he says, I wanted to come not as a lion this time, but as a humbler form. And so that was kind of my play with Narnia and Aslan, as I was crafting the bulldog. But the overlap into the phenomena kind of thing is there as well, because then it was like, well, if they've always been here, then how have they always been here? And I took the position that they've been here forever, and they have been actors in human history almost through a whisper campaign. And I kind of take the artist saying there's a muse, and even the engineer with a product waking up with an idea as part of the whisper campaign. And I think that the NHI whisper campaign is, kind of dovetails into the spiritual realm, which is at some level becomes indistinguishable from saying interdimensional. Because if something is interdimensional, how do you tell the difference of what interdimensional, what is spirit, what is the spiritual realm, if not the dimensional realm. And then I think, I put in the, an essay I wrote that it's the elephant. The phenomena is an elephant, depending on where you grab it. You grab the tail, it's a rope. You grab the foot, and so is it spaceships? Is it, are they here? Are they underground? Are they in the ocean? Are they in the air? Are they interdimensional? And I took the position that I think they're interdimensional. I think they've always been here. And I think for the most part, they act in history, in human history, as a whisper campaign. They're the inspirational muse that guides human civilization, the good and the bad. And, there's the bad side of that too. And so, and that's kind of, so then as I patent a lot and I live in the patent world, if you really wanted to go out there a little bit, just go to Google Patent and look at some of the technology that's assigned to Lockheed Martin and Raytheon. Because that'll blow your mind. Warp drive, anti-gravity device. The level of devices assigned to the US Navy, US Air Force, Lockheed Martin, and Raytheon are indistinguishable from a lot of the stuff that everybody's reporting. And so there's going to be a dilemma, which is the psyop, which is the technology psyop, and what's real. And I think
if I can interrupt, I don't like to interrupt, but you said something that's very timely, actually, too. So you're saying that Lockheed or Northrop have patents on anti-gravity technology. So let me ask you this question. Can I get a patent on something that doesn't exist, or do I have to prove first that it exists and I have something physical in order to patent it?
You can get through the U.S. Patent Office as long as the technology is feasible. You don't have to execute. You have to allege that it works, and that to the patent examiner has to look like it works, but you don't have to build it. So when I go from concept design to a patent, it's before commercialization. And to your point, sometimes it doesn't work. I was working in a device for hospital disinfection that had three modalities, and I patented it immediately, and then two of those modalities didn't pan out. I couldn't actually get to a sterility log 6 result. I thought I could. I reasoned that I could. And one of the interesting things about my life is I've been sued 17 times, 16, 17 times for patent infringement as part of a tech war that I was involved in that I did win. I have non-disclosure on that, so I can't really talk about it, but I did win. And it did, can you patent stuff that doesn't fly? Yes. The technology should at least appear plausible to the patent examiner, but you're not required to actually build anything and show that it functions to get the patent.
So then, with that in mind, and this is fascinating, thank you so much, with the idea that there's a patent on anti-gravity technology that may or may not work, does that then mean if and when someone makes it work, then the person who has that patent has the stuff, like they can shut you down? Or
sort of.
You see what I...
Sort of.
Okay.
So, yes. If they get awarded the patent, they can shut you down. But you can, you generally try in the field of, when you start dealing with patents in general, you usually do designer rounds to get around patents. A really shrewd patent attorney will lock it all down. And I've learned to do that on my patents. Every possible permutation of a designer round you include as a dependent claim in the patent. And that kind of, but I was getting sued left and right. And the quality of the patents was poor, and so I was able to ultimately win, but not before they exacted a cost financially in defending. And I'll tell you one thing that came out of and I'm off topic, and you got to bring me back to the topic, I guess.
No, that's okay. I got another question too.
Do you want to? Well,
when you're ready, keep going.
Okay. Well, I'll just say that I was in a conversation with we're in the middle of a trial, an intellectual property trial, And I said, this is unfair. And the attorney's like, why? And I go, this is a dumb patent. And he kind of shakes his head and he says, Alex, what's a patent? I said, well, it's an inventor claiming the invention. And he just kind of shook his head. And he said, you need to get out of the medtech field now because you're not going to survive it. I was like, well, wait a minute, what do you mean? And he's like, patents have nothing to do with invention. And patents are weapons. And they grant you a monopoly over a field of invention. And until you understand that, you have no business being in medtech because you decided to pick the most litigious space in the world to be in business, and you don't understand the business. And he said, what I recommend you do is learn how to patent, start coming up with your own ideas, and build a defensive portfolio. And I'm stunned by that. And it took me kind of getting about 30 days to get my head around what does that even mean. And then I just realized, as soon as an idea popped in my head, I needed to file a provisional patent. And just one further thing, we won one of those lawsuits by finding a patent from Germany that beat the US patent by 1 day. And that gave me, that taught me the urgency of file a provisional the moment you have the concept, and then perfect the patent later. Don't worry about it, but get the date under the door. And I know that's just kind of, one of the more savvy business practices in technology that you have to get your head around.
Well, you just brought to my mind something that I had not even considered ever. If I'm the defense contractor, then it's worth my time to think of the most wild stuff and just file patents all over the place. So if someone ever makes it, they're like, nope, that's mine. Get out of that sounds like that's kind of what they do. Maybe I've
done that. I mean, I've done that. But I think about it this way, and I'm making this up, but it's not far-fetched. Assume there's a recovered aircraft. Assume an engineer is walking around it, going, "What the hell does that do?" And he's like, "I think it does this." That's an idea, and so you could literally develop a wall of patents around a recovered aircraft without knowing how it operates, just conjecture. I think this does this, and therefore that may work. I'm a patent it. And then, if of course you can get it to fly, well, there you go. You got it all. And then you quickly patent it. But the number of patents is what's striking. The number of patents, for lack of a better word, alien technology is incredible. And I was kind of left with the idea that there's, the Air Force and Navy are bringing these private contractors in, and they're giving them the license to patent, to reverse engineer, and they're doing it rapidly. But you can't really assume that anything that's in that database is functional, or that they understood it well enough to make it functional. But they probably understood it well enough to put an intellectual property moat around it. And so, the technology, if it's ever disclosed, may be off limits.
Fascinating, Alex. I've got a comment about engineers. So moving in esoteric circles as I do, I've met more than one engineer who have held clearances, who are open to all this sort of download. One of the ones, in fact, told me the inventors are the artists and the rest are followers. And it stuck with me all these years. I think that's a true statement. Would you agree with that?
I am. I always find that there are like three skill sets in development. There's the concept guy, the inventor. There's the tinkerer who can take the invention and make it work, but it won't be very pretty. And then you get the design for manufacture, what's called the DFM engineer. Those are three completely different skill sets. I'm usually the concept guy. I think outside the box, and I have these crazy ideas of, can I use pneumatics to throw an IV fluid bag across 100 yards to get to a different machine? I live in that world. And then the tinkerer, for lack of a better word, has to take my concept and say, okay, I think that would work, and this is the size of the motor I need, or this is the size of the tubing for the pneumatic, and does the engineering to develop a prototype. So I'm the concept guy that goes to a tinkerer who does the prototyping, and then once he proves that it actually will work, you give it to a design for manufacture engineer who's, let me give you a quick example because I think to an audience, they don't really get it. Whenever you have a piece of plastic and the part just clicks and snaps, that looks easy. That's hard. The tolerance is to get it just so the snap, and for the snap to hold is hard. And so the tinkerer doesn't do that. The tinkerer is he's more focused on how do I make this work, and what he builds is clunky. It's ugly, it's clunky, it's prototype. It'll break. The design for manufacturing guy has to give it robustness, longevity. Can it fall on the floor and not break? Do the parts mold well? And that's a precision. So you get from concept, who I think is the artist, or the crazy guy who has to think of like outside the box, to the tinkerer who actually builds the prototype, to the design for manufacture guy who makes it perfect. And you need all three minds. And every once in a while, very rarely, do you find somebody who can do all three.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
Normally not. But yeah, so yeah, I think I do see where you'd say that the guy who does the concept is more artist because he's actually thinking off the page.
Awesome. All right, so I got to reel us back. That was a fascinating sidebar, and going off into the weeds. We love to do it, and that was great. So you said something, or I read something in your intro that really hit home for me. You were talking about a frequency war of human consciousness.
Yep.
So I want to get into that a little bit, but also your backdrop. We now know why the dog is there. Why are the pyramids also there? If you, I don't know if it all intertwines.
Okay, so well. You go to write fiction, you write things that are interesting to you. And I had I'm pretty fascinated by the entire subject matter of ancient acoustical structures. And you think of the hypogeum in Malta, and the Pharaoh's chamber and the Pyramid of Giza, which is out of granite. The hypogeum in Malta is probably the most fascinating because, and it's on my bucket list to visit. I haven't made it there yet, maybe next year. And, you whisper, it's a 3-story structure, 5,000 years old. You whisper in the one room and it shouts in it all through the structure. So I could go, hey, can you guys hear me? And if you're in the second floor of that structure, you hear, hey, can you guys hear me? Which is wild.
Wow.
Because I read a little study on that, and it's like nobody knows how to do it. You couldn't do it today. It's all stone. It's not amplification. I mean, there's no technology. It's just stone engineering. And the precision to do that, and the choice of materials required to do that. I don't know where that knowledge came from, but 5,000 years ago, it's not possible. And you take it into the pyramids. So the last January, all these studies started coming out in white papers on the pyramids. I don't know if did you guys see any of that?
No, but this makes sense. It'll be amplifying subtle movements and energies from Earth as well if it's doing that with acoustics.
Right. So the pyramid, they did this deep ground radar LiDAR, or I don't remember the technology, but there are these structures. So it turns out everybody thought the pyramid is this huge monster structure. It's really just a capstone to a monster structure that's underground. It goes 2 kilometers deep.
Wow.
And that just published that's not in mainstream yet. That's published in white paper. And I caught that in last January. And then it's like I'm looking at the white paper, they have the kind of like the imaging. And I'm looking at these chambers and I'm like, okay, that looks like a resonant chamber. It's not a far-fetched. You get to a all granite chamber, and granite has a natural resonance of 19 hertz. And in resonance and frequency, the You know the old thing where you take a glass of water with a little light thing of film and you do like this, and you can shatter the glass next to it if it's made of the same material.
Yeah.
So you don't need a large, a loud trigger. You need the same trigger. So if I'm in a room with a natural resonance of 19 hertz and I have a small 19 hertz device, I can vibrate the entire chamber. I can make the stone sing.
Right.
And that kind of was the starting place for the novel. So there's an entire I built the novel as a almost a med device. I started, okay, I need to just tell you how the story came to my head. So this entire applied physics and engineering scaffolding, you don't see it in the novel, but I had to understand that to write the novel. I joke a lot about I could never write Spider-Man because I would get so caught up with like, wait a minute, this web material is going to clog at night. You've got to soak them. I would get caught in like, okay, well, what is the web material, and how what is the tensile strength, and how does that support a car? Yeah, my mind I have to answer that because once I understand that, then I could go fancy and fiction and all that. But I at least have to have an intelligible premise to jump off into fantasy. And so I wanted to write the novel and I had an idea, but this idea of resonance and frequency, first, from an engineering point of view, had to be logical, rational, and work, at least in concept. Back to the concept designer. So I envisioned that beneath that 2 kilometer, those chambers, 2 kilometers, vertical height, were resonant chambers. The granite Pharaoh's chamber, that with a natural resonance of 19 hertz, is the point of it. And then you get to the pyramids that are located all around the world. This is fiction. I'm not saying this is real, but in theory it could have been real, maybe. And so then you have so then I jump off and I say, okay, all of these ancient structures are repeaters and amplifiers.
Mm-hmm.
So you have the one structure that is delivering a signal that's propagating globally. So then I was like, okay, what frequency propagates globally? Well, if you look at seismic waves, you can read a seismic wave from an earthquake in Japan and California easily. Why? Because the waveform is infrasound. It goes from 18 to 20 hertz. The lower you are in hertz in frequency, the longer your wave is. So I think 19 hertz is like 100 feet. The higher you go in frequency, the shorter your wave. So it's like this very, you get very high frequencies in kilohertz, and you've got this little waveform that's very compressed. The higher the frequency, the shorter the propagation distance. The longer the lower the frequency, the longer your wave is. And the longer your wave is, the farther it can propagate. So 19 hertz is in that range of infrasound that can actually vibrate the crust. And it's within the Earth's natural resonance. But also through air, 19 hertz will get you there as well. And so then I went off of that and I said, okay, so the pyramid in Giza has the granite chamber. If I bring a little 19 hertz into the 19 hertz room, I get it singing loud.
Hmm.
And then I was like, okay, well, what's the point of that? Well, then I'm sending out this 19 hertz signal globally under this fictional construct. And then I said, okay, in that 19 hertz, and 19 hertz is interesting in its own right, because 19 hertz is called the ghost frequency. And I wish I could remember where I read this, but it was one of the early explorers who made it into the pyramid, and they had like a kind of an eerie feeling. And the reason for that is if you enter that chamber, 19 hertz will vibrate the liquid in your eyeball.
Wow.
It's just kind of a fun fact. And that's why it's called the ghost frequency. It gives you a weird feeling, but you don't know what it is you're feeling. And then in consciousness research, there's a frequency that pops up quite a lot, and it's 40 hertz.
Right.
And 40 hertz has a bunch of different names. It's called the bonon. It vibrates the bone marrow, and it also has been tied to basically 40 hertz is somehow tied to a conscious reaction with impacting memory. So I just, it's an interesting frequency of its own. And so I said, okay, then maybe the fictional element of this is you're propagating a 19 hertz signal as a carrier wave, and you modulate in a 40 hertz signal, because that's your message, that's your signal, right? So the signal's the 40 hertz trigger. The standing wave that conducts it globally is 19 hertz. So then how do you modulate the 40 hertz into the 19 hertz? Well, that's a physics thing. It's factual. But I needed the mechanism in the novel, and that became kind of like Ezekiel's wheel. So there's an ancient wheel, and there's a bulldog, and I have a bulldog. So the bulldog breathes almost at an infrasound. I mean, I'm not making that up. Sound can be layered frequency. It's not single frequency.
Yeah.
And something as a bulldog's heavy breathing has a vibration to it. So there are moments in that register that probably border on infrasound. It wasn't a far stretch to say Baloo breathes in 19 hertz. And he's usually on my feet, and it was a fun fact. I made it up. But I would bet if I measured his snoring, I would find at least a 19 hertz signal somewhere in there. So
Wow,
anyway,
I'm loving this.
so then the fiction part of this was that the dog is the key, and you've got to get this 19 hertz breathing bulldog, who's special, into the pyramid.
Catalyst.
Yep.
Yeah.
You've got to get him, and you have to get him into the pyramid at the right time to set this off. And so literally there are two NHIs. And so just the other fictional thing, and then we can jump off into what's really going on in Disclosure. But so then the bulldog has to get to the Pyramid of Giza, and he has to make contact with the wheel, because the magic of the wheel is to modulate the 19 hertz signal with a 40 hertz message. And so once you propagate the 19 hertz signal globally with a 40 hertz modulated signal inside it, you get to entrainment, basically global consciousness reset. And then it was like, okay, what does that even mean? And then it was like this notion that, and I'll just take it one step further, and on the metaphysics side of it, what is heaven? And I use this story just to kind of make the point. And if you hope he won't be listening to this, but my next door neighbor is an absolute idiot.
Okay.
We have kind of a passive aggressive neighbor war.
Right.
And I joke with my wife, I said, if Paul makes it into heaven, that's not really heaven, because I got to deal with him there too. And so then, I think and I don't mean to bring religion into this too much, but there's kind of, you get into universal disclosure, and faith and religion are kind of right there in the same seat sometimes. Catholic theology at least gives you purgatory.
Right.
And because at least if you go through purgatory, you're not a jerk anymore by the time you get into heaven. Because you had to go through some process to get there.
There's a buffering system.
Yeah, you needed that. And without that, then what have you got? And so at the end of the novel, you have this global reset of a sort. And what it does is it really, so one of the theses of the novel is that most human misery is a result of a wall of skin. And I use the analogy of a husband and wife who are mad at each other, not even talking to each other, and they're stewing in different rooms, and they keep amping themselves up. And about 2 days later, one of them's finally like, "What am I mad at?" And they realize that they really got upset at each other over something that was so stupid that they can't even say it out loud, because then they realize how stupid it is.
Yeah.
And that's kind of what I mean by the wall of skin, is that we don't realize that we're actually part of the same whole because of the wall of skin. And if you drop the wall of skin, then consciousness meets, and you don't judge because you understand instantly what the person's, like, for instance, you would understand fully why the person was who they were and why they act the way they do. And so there'd be no judgment. But at the end of the novel, there is one person who jumps out a window. It was just kind of an abrupt ending.
Oh, geez.
Well, it's a judge. The judge jumps out the window.
Ah,
And the reason the judge jumps out the window is he spent his life judging other people, and he's really a bad guy. And he thinks in that instant, "Oh my God, they're going to see who I am." And he has spent his entire life sitting up high, looking down at everybody. And he's the one person. He's the one person who can't allow himself to be seen, because he's the judge, and he leaps. And then that's kind of that was just kind of I didn't want a nice, clean, happy ending, I guess.
Well, I mean, do you want to give away the ending though?
Well, there's a lot more to it.
Okay.
I'm not mentioning the dog's role in any of that, so the ending's preserved.
Okay, all right. Just making sure we're not. Before we go into the other aspect, I do want to ask, like, with the frequencies you're talking about, are they 432 or 440? Does that matter?
Well, no, those are normally the meditation frequencies, right? The 432. I've used that. The 19 and 40 can't be that. I could have made the 432 the signal, modulate on the 19 hertz. The standing wave had to be infrasound. And then I was just going through a lot of the research into consciousness and some of the quantum consciousness papers. And 40 hertz shows up quite a lot. 432 shows up in a lot of the meditation stuff. But in the sciences, 40 hertz with consciousness is a significant finding.
Okay.
Yeah, Mike and I met as musicians, so we understand a little bit about the frequencies. And I wanted to mention to you, Mike, I often high pass my mixers around about 40, 80 hertz to cut out that rumble at the bottom. So I found that really interesting that you mentioned the 40 hertz frequency.
Yeah.
If we don't mind, just to do this real quick, Stuart, because I'm thinking of that time when you caught what I'm going to call earthquake static. I wonder if that is what frequency? If that is that infrasound? Because Alex, at one point, Stuart was recording, and there happened to be an earthquake under his feet when he was recording, and he recorded what I call a earthquake static, and the wave was so freaky. It was almost like a flat line at the top with fingers going down, and it looked really bizarre, and it sounded very unsettling too. I'm wondering if that's maybe Alex, if you're interested, I could send you the wave photo of that waveform and see if we can identify what there is, because I think there's significance to that. But anyway, that's I guess neither here nor there. But all right, so you mentioned, Alex, that you're what's really going on with disclosure. So what have you got for that?
Well, just going down the patent database. Tic Tac, I think, is all man, all human.
Right.
Okay.
I think a lot of the lighted aircraft are all human. I think some of the technology we've figured out from a recovered craft of another kind. I think the real NHI is the interdimensional variety. And I think that's common enough to where, that would be the concern. And I think the biggest issue with disclosure are going to be the traditional, and I'm thinking of my mother-in-law, who just grew up as a very strict Bible-toting Baptist, and I don't have a problem. My faith is at my core, and I don't have a problem with any of this stuff. I find it if you wanted to, I don't want to bring scripture to your program unless you want me to, but there are enough little mentions in scripture, if you look for them, that suggest, there are other folds, and, There's one interesting line in the book of Hebrews, which says, therefore we are surrounded by so great a cloud of witnesses. And, I think most of normal people to read that and don't really give it a lot of thought. I read that and I'm like, well, wait a minute. If we're surrounded, that actually makes perfect sense to me, because there are, in any one given time, over 1,000 cell conversations running through this room from my neighbors. And we don't, you talk, you get into frequency, the human experience is limited to this much. The frequency span is this. And in dimensionality, just out of curiosity, have either of you read a little book called Flatland? Or have you heard of it?
I've heard of the concept, but I've not read the book.
So
No,
it's a book that's only this thin, and it was written in the late 1800s, I think. And it kind of put my mind into a fun place, because the notion was a two-dimensional world visited by a three-dimensional creature. And the creature passes, well, I should say creature, but a three-dimensional object passes through a two-dimensional plane. And the entire perception of Flatland is, how does the two-dimensional creature perceive the three-dimensional? And from there, I deduce certain rules on when phenomena are interdimensional, just from that thought experiment. Because from that thought experiment, the 3D creature understands the entire history of the 2D creature just looking down. And the analogy, to somebody might be a comic strip. Whereas, we look at the comic, the Charlie Brown character in the comic strip, he doesn't know what's happening in the next pane until you get to the next pane. So the reader, you can look at the end and you see the entire life of the Charlie Brown in that strip. And dimensionality gives you that, and the attributes of God are, all-knowing, all everywhere, being all-seeing, all-knowing. And the only way you get to that is dimensionality. And so my construct was, all right, we're probably in a 5-dimensional world as a 3-dimensional creature, and every once in a while a 5-dimensional being will pass through. What would that look like?
Yeah.
Well, that would be, and just going back to the thought experiment of 2D and 3D, you take let me play this out for you. You take a cube and you pass it through a plane, and where it hits is a point. So within the plane, you see a point. As the cube passes through and goes through and through and through and through, first it's a point, then it's a triangle or square that gets bigger and bigger and bigger, and then smaller, smaller, and smaller, and disappears. And so one of the properties that you look for if you're thinking about this, is there something dimensional? Is something that's literally defying the laws of physics in front of your face and is changing shape in a way that defies the laws of physics in front of your face? Because if you see that, that's the characteristic of an interdimensional transfer from going through a lower dimension. And when you think about some of the UFO stories or UAP stories, it's that, right? It's defies the laws of physics. It can appear, it disappears. I automatically, my mind is, all right, that's interdimensional, it's higher dimension. And then you get to interdimensional and higher dimension. Well, that's indistinguishable from spirit, right? Because, the old trope that sufficiently advanced technology looks like magic, the corollary to that is interdimensionality always is spiritual. There's no difference. Go back to scripture, therefore we're surrounded by so great a cloud of witnesses. What does that mean? Well, dimensionally, it's easy. They're right here. And that leads me to kind of think, okay, so what is death and what is heaven and where was I for 3 days? Well, I think I was right here. And then, my brain was dead. For sure, organically, my brain was dead. I had an EEG, it was flatline, I was vegetative. And yet, Alex existed. So then it's like, it doesn't take me that long to understand that, one of the most dramatic, most fascinating claims is that your consciousness doesn't live in your brain. And if your consciousness doesn't live in your brain, well, you're now talking, the language of every spiritual tradition,
Mm-hmm.
which is that you are not your biology. You're more than your biology. And on top of all that, you get into this really weird. I forgot who the UFO guy was. I think it was Greer, who quoted something. Basically said that alien referred to us as a container. Container.
That was Bob Lazar.
Yeah, I was
Yeah.
going to
Well,
say.
sorry. Container of souls. And I thought about that a lot because that kind of follows my thinking, which is, if you kill the organic brain and your spirit, then where's your consciousness? And then if your consciousness is not local, then unifying global consciousness actually starts to make a lot more sense, that we're really one in a sense. And then the idea of God being the universe and one mind is one of those new agey things as well. But if consciousness isn't confined within, if you kill off the brain, you still exist, which is weird, right? Because for so long you grew up being taught that everything is biology, and it's not. It can't be.
Alex, I've mentioned on this show more than once that I had a realization many years back that if we're coming from a place of all knowing, in other words, we're God, the only thing left to know and experience is what it's like to not know everything, to fall into time, to be that cartoon strip character in 2D and experience things as they unfold. It's kind of beautiful. So I know it's hard here in this reality at times, but I think we're adding to the awareness and consciousness of the whole.
I'd agree with that. It's just a fascinating subject, but I think what'll blow people's mind is that you're not your brain.
Mm.
Because to take that to its conclusion is a step too far for many. And then the idea that you're not alone may be a step too far. And that they've been here all this time, maybe that's a step too far for many. But I'm really looking forward to Spielberg's movie. I'm curious where his brain went. But I think just by the nature of movies and big cinema, it's a lot of the lights in the sky and the almost the scary side of it. And I generally don't think that. I think the scary side of it is what the games the government plays, and I think the games the government is planning on playing. Because I think alongside disclosure is going to be the gamesmanship too, with what's real and what's not. And if you want to freak people out, I mean, look at the Chinese drone shows. You want the spectacle of lights. That's really easy to recreate, and that's the part that is probably the most troubling to me about where this goes, because the governments have lost. They so many things have come out that cause distrust and loss of confidence in government. That when you get to that, when you see there's a spacecraft approaching Earth. All right, I'm the guy that's going to call that BS. I'm like, okay,
Yes.
that's now you're messing with me.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason I say that is, you look through history. I think they've been here forever, and I don't think they mess with us. I think they guide us, and so I don't see it that way, but I do think that's coming, because sometimes the government can't help themselves from doing what governments do, which is want to be in control. So I don't know. I mean, I'm generally not a conspiracy theorist, but I think disclosure topics have to make you a little bit of one, or you become too naive and too trusting.
There's an interesting metaphor with the fact that the pyramids are being covered up. Like, we're only seeing part of the equation. We're seeing from the 2D perspective. We're not seeing the whole structure. At the Sphinx, when I was a kid, all it was a head above the sand. Same with the Easter Island statues. There's so much underground, so much hidden. It feels like some sort of metaphor.
Yeah, and I'll tell you, we were in the Grand Canyon, and there's something interesting there too. So we had a guide, and he's like, well, the entire north wall is off limits. And we said, why? And he goes, the government's doing some stuff. I said, how long has it been off limits? And he goes, I don't know, my whole lifetime. It's like, well, then it's not really the government doing some stuff, is it? It's like,
it's where the hieroglyphics are, right?
Yeah, they're right. So there are hieroglyphics, and because that set me off on a rabbit hole, and I went down, and then you can find from 1920. Some of the published stuff that came out was that the Smithsonian got called in, and then everything got shut down, and what they found inside some of the caves in the Grand Canyon were Egyptian. Or, the hieroglyphics looked Egyptian. So what is that?
Not supposed to be possible, though, right?
Yeah, right. So, I just finally got to the point where, my wife and I kind of make a joke of everything. And we're like, well, if the ship comes down, let's go inside and see what they say hello.
Very zen.
Yeah. And even, with death, my wife gets mad at me because I say, I can't wait to die again. And she's like, stop. She's like, stop saying that. And I was like, no. If there's a mystery around the corner, I'm the guy who runs to the corner. I want to go see it. Spaceship lands, I want to be the first one on board. I want to see it. That's just my curiosity. So anyway, I mean, I'm not that I'm chomping at the bit to die, but one of the things, and I think it's kind of a universal with anybody who goes through a near-death experience, is the fear of death is gone, because been there, done that, I guess. And there's a natural curiosity, and in fact, I think one of the interesting things that follow from that, even though I have no memory of that whole experience, I'm left with an obsession with the afterlife, and that interplay between life and death, and what happens in between those moments. And I have a humble attitude towards mystery. And so that leaves me with sort of a humble attitude towards this entire disclosure phenomena. But I don't think, I wrote in that essay I wrote, it's like, I don't think you look up, I think you look inside. And I do think the major part of the entire, if the non-human intelligence and alien stuff is coming to fruition in our lifetime, I think it's more of a understanding that whisper campaign throughout history. And I just think we finally meet the mechanism of the whisper, perhaps.
That's awesome and beautiful all at the same time. To maybe bring it full circle, I wanted to ask really since the start, when, and forgive me, I don't mean to be say this the wrong way, but when you died, you said you don't have any memory of it, but like, I'm kind of curious, like there's a lot of times people will report, like if they have a near-death experience, like there's a tunnel of light or something like that. I'm wondering if that was there or a thing for you, but I'm also wondering, like, why were you even frozen to begin with? Like, is that something that you were gonna do anyway, or did they do that to you? Just like, I don't understand that part of it.
So that's a protocol now. So if you now, in Florida anyway, and I think here in the United States, if you get coded as sudden death and you're within a certain time period of that and you reach the ER, they try to preserve your brain function in the hopes that you will come out of it.
Oh.
And you can, and you do sometimes. I did.
I'm your example.
Wow.
Okay. All right. Wow. Okay. That's cool.
Whereas if you don't freeze them, there's so much brain damage that happens in that short period of time that there's no chance of recovery.
Okay.
So they didn't do it like, it's not like for the cryogenic stuff where they freeze you for later, which is kind of interesting in its own right. I don't think that works though. I don't think that works yet though, because I don't think your brain, right? So I don't think that gets you past the entire spirit side of the non-locality of consciousness. I think you just end up with a frozen brain that does nothing when you're dead. I don't think you reanimate that way. I don't think the biology is the giver of life.
Okay.
I think it's spirit.
Yep.
I've always been curious about that too. I don't know if you know the answer to this one, but with the cryogenics part, do they have to, like, if you're going to do that, do you have to like be within that certain couple minutes mark, or are those people, like some people say like Walt Disney or something, like, and I don't, I think he's been probably gone for a while. Like
I mean, if he comes back, I my own thought process on that. And I'm not an expert on it, but I think if I paid to have my body frozen, I would have a frozen body, and in 100 years, it would still be a frozen body. I don't think you would see Alex again.
okay.
I don't think reanimate. I don't think pushing warm blood through a dead brain reanimates life. I
Okay,
think
you're into an interesting topic here once again, many interesting topics. So there's the preservation of bodies through mummification. So there seems to be some idea that the DNA can be rebooted in the future, I think.
I think it can be cloned,
Hmm.
right? And I
Oh
don't
wow.
really know what you go with that, because that throws my whole theory out, right? Because what spirit's in the clone? Who is the clone?
Yes.
Uh, I
I
mean,
guess just with my nagging question with the cryogenics though is like with your statement or postulation, what if somebody was cryogenically frozen within, I don't know, like 5 minutes of their passing, where they're potentially still have, like in that little window of time, like they did for you, but not for hundreds of years, but just for the sake of trying to help you get through it or whatever. Is that potentially the key for whether it works or not? I don't know. I'm just like throwing stuff out there now, but
I'm going to go yes, but I can't tell you. That's just my thought is, I think if you do it within that window, you're good. If you do it outside the window, you're just freezing a corpse.
yeah,
I'm
interesting.
also interested in whoever came up with that modality and how were they inspired to come up with that idea? I wonder if it's something similar to your journey.
I don't know, but you'd have to freeze a lot of animals to get there, at least validated conceptually. I tend to think that whole industry, and I guess it's its own, that's a good word for it, is probably trying to get as much money out of filthy rich people as possible with zero concern with actually reanimating, because everybody will be dead by the time you have to reanimate. Um,
Wow.
think about the claim. We're going to freeze you in the hopes that in the future we can figure out how to unfreeze you and reanimate you.
Right. Yes.
I wouldn't bank on that.
No.
And you don't need to, because the businessman who's running that business has a hell of a claim. Don't worry, in 100 years, somebody will be here to fix this.
Yeah.
Oh no, it sounds
Meanwhile,
like some religious claims too. Like, don't worry, we'll give you a free pass into heaven. All sorts of claims.
yeah,
The more you donate, the better, the closer to God you
Yes.
get, right?
72 virgins. Like,
Yeah.
I mean, you can go out there. I mean, I do believe in, I do believe in life eternal,
Hmm.
and I think that follows for me, the entire notion that, dead and alive is right next to each other. It's just one dimension off. Um, what's more interesting thought is actually the counter to heaven, which is hell,
Hmm.
and and that's kind of fun to deal with in fiction, I guess. Um, Number one is, and I'm taking you off topic, so I don't want to do that.
Oh no,
I'll let you guys direct the conversation.
No, it's
Don't let
all
me do it.
related. Okay, I want to address something you said earlier then about initiatory rights. Now, I have done more than one out of body projection, so that was an initiatory right for myself, which I didn't wasn't through any secret society. I just read how to do it and did it. But that showed me, okay, I'm not that body because I could see my body laying in the bed.
Hmm.
Jesus basically went through that initiatory rite publicly by dying and then resurrecting 3 days later. And maybe not, well, let's not get into the specifics of that, but it's all kind of related.
I think
well,
so.
I did want to also say that too, because Alex was out of it for 3 days, like, and we've talked about the three
That's
day,
what I was, yes.
element before. It's pretty interesting.
Yeah. I like I said, I'm enjoying where I'm at in my life, because it's like for the first time I actually can talk about what happened 20 years ago. and I don't really care what anybody thinks about me because it doesn't matter at this point.
No, you
That's
shouldn't be
awesome. That's
self-conscious
awesome.
at all. Like,
Yeah.
so for me, these are completely normal topics. And I was mentioning earlier, I've met a number of engineers who have come because it's a safe space in esoteric circles to talk about these topics. And I'm very
Right.
encouraged by the fact that you went to a psychologist who was aware of the near-death experiences, and sounds like that person was quite supportive too.
Yeah, it basically left me with I'm not necessarily crazy. And his rationale made sense to me, because it's important that I meet you in the logical place. I'm just wired that way, and so the fact that there are there's a biomedical researcher who is mentioned in the book. I don't remember the author, and it's referred in the book as I think Mr. D. And in that novel, he basically says, or the researcher, um, this was not fiction. This was nonfiction. The researcher basically says that he believes his ideas come from outside his head,
Hmm.
and I share that because I absolutely believe that if you wake up with a fully formed idea in your head, is that really yours? And then where does that come from? That's kind of, you get to the classical composers and they all say it's the muse.
Yeah.
And it's, going back to science and just going back to that muse concept. Science does that quite a lot and it drives me nuts. When I was a kid, and I'm using 20 years old as a kid, but when I was younger, I was an atheist for good part of my teenage and young adult years, and I would argue, um, from the point that you talk about creation, and it's Big Bang theory, and that's I don't need to go anywhere beyond that because it's already science has figured it out. It's the Big Bang theory, and then I get to a class in modern physics. I guess this is a third year. Modern physics was third year, and you get into a chapter that's titled the singularity, and
Mm.
the opening line of the chapter, which I'm pretty sure it reads pretty close to this, is that at some point in time, zero, there's a point of zero dimension with all the energy and mass of the universe. And and as a student, you read that and that explains everything. As an older adult, I read that again. I'm like, well, wait, that's a hand wave. I mean, he just made a claim of magic. He said
Yeah, I know.
there's a point of zero dimension, and all the energy and mass of the universe exists in that point. And then okay, but now we move on. It's like, well, wait, well, my mind didn't let me go anywhere from that. It's like, well, hold on. How do you get all the mass and energy into a point of no dimension? Because how do you even have a point of no dimension? It doesn't exist. It's zero dimension. And yet
Hmm.
the singularity definition is in a point of zero dimension, all the matter and energy of the universe comes out of. That's a singularity. And that is a theological statement. In the
Yeah.
beginning, God made, the universe. And yet, as a university student in my 20s, I didn't go beyond that. Nobody did. We just like nod and go, okay, this is all explained. And science does that a lot. You give it, as soon as you give it a term, you move on. And it's wrong. It's wrong to do that. Because you kind of have to go into the claim and like, okay, physics isn't really explaining this at all. And then when you get to this level of science, it's actually theoretical. And you listen to them do their TED Talks and so forth. They don't have certitude with any of that either. They are the theoretical physicist is the humblest. The applied physicist has it all figured out. He knows everything. The theoretical physicist, who's supposed to be the guy who knows everything, is delving into quantum entanglement. And you say, okay, well, explain it. He goes, well, you don't have to. It's a mystery.
Yes.
And it's the first scientist you'll meet who'll say that. But it's like, two particles separated miles apart are interacting as if they're connected with no connection. And that's really the key to understanding quantum consciousness. And that gets you into, a whole esoteric kind of understanding of it's not as black and white as we're taught in school. And ultimately, I don't think anybody has the answers to anything anymore. 10 years ago, I would have said we had most of this stuff figured out. Now I don't even think we have anything figured out. Anyway, I think it's going to be a fascinating year for sure. I just think as this stuff kind of goes further and further, the governments are being forced to disclose more. And then I think you guys follow the dead scientists, right?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So that's interesting because I don't think that's government. Those are private contractors killing them off. And there's a hell of a lot of money involved.
Mm-hmm.
That sort of plays into what you were talking about earlier with the patents and patenting something that doesn't necessarily work, but you just own the patent. But I did some preliminary, I can't really call it investigative stuff really, but I mapped out like when did they either disappear or die, and what were their ages and such. And interestingly, like I personally don't know that it's really anything nefarious, but I think it's interesting that about half of them are less than 50 years old. That's pretty interesting. And then there's a lot of time in between most of them that could potentially just be coincidental, as it were. But the ones that really jumped out at me were the two people that were shot in their own house, and those were relatively close together in terms of time frame too. So I don't know. That's some wild stuff.
That you're willing to kill over the technology is crazy.
Yeah. I don't know off the top of my head what those particular people were working on, but it's pretty sickening actually.
But see, that would be economic motive, right? And that's ugly. I think, and you wonder what I think the secrecy, is portrayed as looking out for us. But I think the secrecy is economic, not looking out for us. And I actually think most of the world just, the funny thing about the age that we're in, it's kind of like a fascinating timeline. Nothing shocks. Epstein files come out and say they're eating children. It's like nothing shocks. There's a CIA disclosure that says the CIA killed President Kennedy. And the next day it's like, oh, well, we knew that. It's like nothing shocks anymore. I probably shouldn't have gone as deep as I did with the Epstein files, but I was kind of more fascinated, just separating out the scandalous from the less scandalous, kind of like the more interesting conspiratorial of the ties that he had. And because there are links to the UAP phenomena in Epstein in the files too. It is a pretty fascinating, his connections are just kind of fascinating.
That part's news to me. I mean, I've definitely heard plenty about Epstein and such, but with few exception, nothing ever happens to anybody. So like yes. I was just like, okay, whatever. It's a smokescreen. Like if something bad's happening, pull out the Epstein files, and if that doesn't work, bring out the aliens. Let's throw
the aliens worry me because the aliens, like I said, if you watch some of the China drone shows, those things are freaky cool, and lights in the sky at night are hard to discern. And you could literally say, you could have the War of the Worlds. They're coming in 7 days. They're going to take out Florida. What? How do you know? How do you know? I mean, I don't know what you do with that. And I think you have to be aware that's the nature of government agencies to try to play with us, and then trying to separate that from what's real. And I just rely on history, and I think the phenomena has always been here. The phenomena will always be here. I think it interacts with humans more, not to oversay it, but a whisper campaign, inspiration, muses. The crazy thing is the alien story that President Truman had him in the White House um, Skinny Bob or whatever that story.
Yes, I've heard these stories.
And it's like, well, that's a whole different level, and I don't even know what to do with that.
Hmm.
Well,
But
what I wanted to ask real quick, like, what's your take on like the abductions when people are taken by these beings? What
I don't know.
if you have a take on that? I don't know.
I don't know. I almost want to say I think those are human. I I don't know. And I don't know why that would be necessary if if they've been interacting with humanity for so long. Um, but
I found myself wondering that the other day with the idea of like the hybrid program, or just the abduction phenomenon in general. They usually do seem to take something from you. If they are interdimensional in nature, which I personally believe they are, why would they need our physical DNA? What would they do with it? I don't know.
hybrid engineering is best I could think is you're collecting human DNA and you're gonna but the genetic code is fascinating too, because that is the idea that you program life and can very easily swap out two genes to go from chimp to Homo sapiens. And then at some point was there an engineering snippet inserted into human DNA, which would literally set the entire religious trope on fire, and I don't know where that goes. Although, I did read a paper on that and identified which gene was likely not part of any reasoned evolutionary span, but was inserted. And these are the characteristics of that gene and what the attributes would be for Homo sapiens. I just am back to anything's possible at this point. I know
Hmm.
nothing. And now I'm at the point where I know for certain nobody else knows nothing either. Or at least everybody's just guessing. And and then you read I just read Chris Bledsoe's book UFO of God,
Hmm.
which was kind of a little bit different than some of the other books. And then you get into where this overlaps with faith, because he has the encounter with calls it, I guess, the Lady of Light or the Lady in White,
Mm-hmm.
which sounds an awful lot if you're a Catholic, with the Fatima story.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And then you have in the Fatima story the sun that danced, and you have the orbs, which certainly look like the sun that danced. And then you get into the Bible story. You have the Magi following a star, and then the UFO side of that is, well, that star was an orb. It's like,
Hmm.
okay, so three wise men follow an orb, and it doesn't sound as much fun as following a star, but it's more pragmatically, it's more likely, right? And
Perhaps,
then
yeah.
so what is that? That aliens led the Magi to Jesus? I don't know what to do with that, but that seems plausible to me that it's an orb, because there's all these old paintings that have UFOs in them from 500 years ago.
Yeah.
And then if the wise men are following an orb, and the Fatima is the Lady of Light, and orbs dancing for her to show the crowd, I don't. What do you do with that? I don't know. I don't have the toolkit to process that. I just accept that it's possible. And if I accept it's possible, I just, almost like the science hand waving with the Big Bang, I just move on, because I that's not anything that from a physics point of view I can, incredibly put an answer to. But it does open up the possibility that, that to quote Chris Bledsoe's work, UFO of God, that there is a spiritual side to that phenomena. And then I think with all things, there's always the duality of good and bad, good and evil. And that's kind of the discernment requirement. Because then you look at like Hollywood. And Hollywood is fascinated with the opposite of everything I'm fascinated with, which is the occult, which I want to stay as far away from possible. And they believe the occult is real, and they have their own whisper campaign. Every culture's had child sacrifice. Why? That's, I I kind of went down that hole too, the anthropology and culture of, the this notion of sacrificing children. Where does that come from? And why does that persist even to this day? And to me, that's an evil whisper campaign. That's a malevolent force that wants to do the opposite of what the benevolent force wants you to do. And you have the duality of good and evil in every culture and every religion, and it makes no and it would only be logical that you would carry that forward into this whole phenomena. But yeah, I don't know what that evil presence is, but I did include it in the novel. Two NHIs come through the portal, one good, one bad. And the interesting part of that is the bad one is actually thinks they're the good one.
Uh-huh.
I define evil. C.S. Lewis, actually Tolkien, seemed to present evil not as a force of its own, but the absence of good and the falling away of good. And so the evil was less an active force to Tolkien and more of the vacuum of goodness. And I portrayed evil as certitude, because absolute certainty that you're doing the right thing will permit you to do the most evil of things under the notion that you're actually doing the greater good.
Oh, yes. I've
Right?
seen that
So
through history.
right. So the evil character, the evil force actually thinks they're helping humanity. And they're helping humanity by causing a reset. The way you want that, you call it the flood or the Tower of Babel. Humanity gets a little high on its horse to where it can't be trusted, and from outside that somebody has to come down and put you back in your place to save you. It's a grace. I've got to kill you to help you, kind of certainty. And you see that with government, and we're going to stop disinformation so you don't hurt yourself.
Right.
Like, we'll censor you and cut your tongue. So out of a genuine desire to be good to you, it's that.
You'll thank us for it.
Yeah, it's that level of certitude. I think does eventually lead to evil. And so I don't think Tolkien had it wrong. I think I added another little perspective to that, which is that the absolute certainty is always evil. It's the opposite of humility. Absolute certainty is arrogance, and it leads you no quarter to second guess yourself or even entertain the thought that you might be wrong. And if that's what you're doing, then you're absolutely evil.
Well, I think that's a great place to ground the conversation and sort of land it there. Alex, where can people find more information about you or pick up a copy of your book?
So the book has its own website, weightofadog.com. There are some interesting documents there. There's a map page, and if you go to the map and you scroll down, you'll see a little gold key. And the end of the novel has a little gold key printed on the page. And I kind of wanted to do like a little bit of a puzzle box, kind of like a Rosetta Stone to the novel. So all of the science and engineering and mythology and archaeology is in that document, which is the gold key. That's kind of fun to look at.
Wow.
And there's also a reader's guide, just because a book club wanted one, and I kind of gave some thought as to the questions the novel opens up. And there's a interesting document, which is kind of cool to look at. It's the screen adaptation, which I'm working on. And it's the pitch deck for the studio, which kind of shows the novel in a cinematic flavor, which is just kind of fun. I'm not sure I'll get to that. I'm hoping that the novel makes it there, but we'll see. But there's also a. So it's called the Codex of the Wheel, and I wrote a companion volume, which is the science and engineering and mythology of the novel, as it's separate as a companion book. I don't know what to do with it, but I thought there would be enough questions that somebody would want to go deeper. So that document lives on the website as well. So if you're a science and engineering guy and you wanted to kind of get into the scaffolding of the novel, you could pull out, you could download the Codex of the Wheel, and you could pull the mythology and science from the gold key on the website. And then if you're just looking for me, my my website that's kind of like my brand is alexlucio.me. And that just is kind of shows my portfolio of what I've worked on over the years. Which is and actually both of those websites, alexlucio.me and weightofadog.com, both have contact the author form, and I respond to every query.
All right, great.
So.
Thank you so much for your time in this conversation. Like, we didn't really know much about you, didn't know where it was going to go, but it was fascinating. I loved every minute of it. Truly did.
I did too, because this was fun.
Well, Reverend Stu, that was really something. I'm thinking a lot now about me and my body and my existence and everything with what we just talked about. Like, I don't even know what to say.
Full on. I know it brings into question everything, which is what this topic does. I wanted to say to you, from my perspective, that is a very intelligent man. And I view intelligence as both the left and right hemisphere brains, and I think he's integrating both. Absolute pleasure to talk to him today.
I would agree on all that you just said. Absolutely. For me, first of all, the idea that he was dead for 3 days. That's amazing. That's absolutely amazing, and that makes me wonder. He explained it to the extent of there's a certain time window of minutes. I don't know exactly how many minutes those were, but if you're able to like freeze down the brain or whatever, you have like better chances of survival and whatnot. But that really indicates that whoever we are, whatever we are, it is outside of the brain. It's outside of the body. It's outside of us.
Yeah, I'm quite sure of that from my own experiences and my own reading. So I'm absolutely convinced in that. And you know what I felt too? I'm sorry that people feel a bit reluctant to talk about these things if they're coming from an engineering scientific background. It's a real shame, and I hope that changes in the future.
Well, I think it's changing now as well, with Alex being brave as he is to come forward and talk about this stuff openly. But I can also, I got to say, I see where he's coming from when you're from that background. You do have to sort of take that into consideration, but also with all the conversations we've had and all the people who are stepping forward in all kinds of places, it really is making it okay to talk about these topics intelligently and maturely and respectfully, and that's the biggest win, I think, for the whole movement, as it were.
Well, I can connect some dots for you from previous conversations now that this has come up. And I mentioned that I've spoken to some of these engineers in my role as a minister, and they have confided some of these stories in me. I'm not going to go into details, of course, but it was completely normal for me. Another interesting thing for me is, if I'm not talking about esoteric things, then what on earth am I in this role for? So I'm coming from the exact opposite perspective in a way.
Okay, yeah, that's a fair statement as well. But at one point I was going to say, like, you just read Stuart's mind when he was talking about the muse and the artists and the musicians and everything. Because I heard you thinking, man. I heard you thinking.
I was. Yeah, you were spot on.
That was great. But the other big thing for me, as if that isn't big enough, right? The other big thing was the patents and the idea. Because I've heard from other podcasters or whatever citizen journalists or whatever you call these people, that there are patents for antigravitics and such, and to hear it from someone who makes a living doing it, that you don't need to really prove the concept as long as it sounds good and you present it correctly. You can. So, like, maybe I'm going to file a patent tomorrow for the teleportation device.
Oh, wow. May as well. And I also liked the way you talked about the 3 layers, the 3 different types of people who were there. And I was thinking, because we're musicians, as the audience knows, and I was thinking you've got the songwriter who gets inspired to write the song. Then you have the producer in the studio who kind of guides you. And then you've got the engineer who's the technical person. So we have those aspects too.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Wow. That's a great, wow. Yeah. Good stuff. So we're missing those people on this channel, but
We're making it work.
but yeah, I think I was thinking about that today too. I think we're doing pretty darn good for just what we've got to work with, so to speak. But yeah, that's a good way to think about it too. I hadn't considered that.
Well, it takes all different types of people, see, and that's another reason why I wish that paradigm wouldn't be so resistant to the very people who are creating the ideas. You see the irony of that situation? I do.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I don't know if this fits in or not. I want to say it. It sort of fits in this, in a way. I don't know why I feel compelled to say this right now, but because we're talking about patents and such, I know as a fact, I'm not going to mention the people's names because I'm pretty sure they don't want to, that to happen. But I was at a private tour of JPL, I don't know, about a year and a half ago or so. At the time, a friend of mine had worked there, and I brought some other friends, and then we looked at the Mars rover, and that started the tour off in a funky way because the people that I brought with me, they're like, oh yeah, we know who made the patent for those wheels, but they're not getting credit for it. Oh. And yeah, it happened back, the invention was filed in the patent office in the 1940s. And it was called, I think, independent bogey, I think it was called, where wheels normally, one wheel moves up and the other wheel, they go like this, right? Well, the independent bogey was designed after the horse trotting. Horses don't trot like this; they trot like this. Yeah. So it was like independent suspension might be another way that we call it modern day. But the thing sat for 50 years doing not much of anything, and then they used that for the Mars rover. And that person who actually invented it said, like, hey, that's my thing. Can you give me a shout out? And they're like, no. So they took him to court, and it was, somebody against the United States government. Long story short, the attorney discovered that the patent office intentionally left blank spaces before that patent. Right. And magically, and this was proven, but the long story short is it's the United States government. They have more money than you do. You can fight this for the rest of your life. They'll probably take all your money away from you fighting this case. All the person wanted was credit, not even dollars, because they didn't need that. They just wanted the credit and they didn't get it. I don't know if that fits into what we're talking about here or not, but I just felt the need to put that out there because it seemed appropriate at the time.
No, I kind of get it. And there's also another music parallel. Sorry for bringing it back to music all the time, but someone can write a song, someone can plagiarize that song, and then it's up to the person who's bringing the case to prove that the second person even heard your song.
Yeah.
Which is crazy because the timeline could demonstrate that anyway, but that's how the law works.
Well, you have to, even if you are the rightful owner, you have to enforce it. Yeah. And the reality is, if the other side has more dollars, it's really horrible. But I don't want to end this on a downer like that. But I did want to put that out there for the various people who might be listening to this conversation. Just be aware of that. That's a thing, and that it's real, as it were.
Well, I know that patents are classified too. Certain ones that come in, there's thousands of them.
Yeah, and I'm guessing that if something can be used in a military style or something, you're more likely to have this happen than perhaps like a medical type of a thing. But nonetheless, as the truth is coming out across the world, that's another truth that not a lot of people know, I think, and it's really, really terrible. But I'm sorry for that tangent, Stuart. Let's
no, that's okay. It's an established, identified gatekeeping mechanism. So I applaud people that come forward and even talk about that aspect.
So yeah, how do we dig ourselves out of this this one and end this on a nice positive note? Because this is amazing conversation overall.
It was. I loved how he was talking about or alluding to the fact that we're all one, which I agree with, once we leave our physical incarnations. And I would say that I don't think he did die because we don't die. He just wasn't in his body for that period.
Okay, I can agree with that one. It just still adds. It's just the question is like what is it? What's the magic in us that is the deciding factor whether you're coming back or not? Like with the cryogenic people.
Well, okay, I'll touch on this very briefly. I know we're in an outro here. You can be talked into coming back and then not remember when you come back.
Okay, that's interesting.
Yep.
Well, that sounds like another episode in the future.
I have a suspicion that some of these so-called encounters or abductions are when people have passed. They've met these interdimensional beings who have said, hey, we think you should go back. And they have very few memories of that. So they're left with a strange encounter and now I'm back again.
Well, there are plenty of what we'll call alien abductions that people report seeing deceased family members. And what to make of that?
I would love to have a guest come on and talk about that. Just putting it out there, universe, if you're listening, the universe is always listening.
Indeed it is. So that's a perfect spot to say thank you all for joining us. And remember, if you're on the YouTube, hit that like button and subscribe and share us because it does help, and it's free. And, apparently I've got to say it. I don't know.
Please do.
No, I mean, I don't understand why it needs to be said out loud, but we just said it out loud. So, it just seems strange.
No, thank you for saying it, Mike. I need reminders and prompts all the time, as you know, so I imagine other people out there do as well.
Fair enough. Okay, so once again, hit the like button, the subscribe button, the share button. Thank you all so much for doing that for us. And oh, by the way, audio only, folks. Did you know you can text us? And it is, it's like pseudonymous. So we would only see the last 4 digits of your phone number, but feel free to send us a text message if you so desire, compliment or idea or question or whatever. You can reach out to us and have interaction with us. So check that out. Whatever platform you're on with audio only, you can do that.
Mike, is it anonymous or synonymous?
Pseudonymous, I think it would be, because, I mean, technically it would be anonymous. Like we're, it's still, okay, yeah, I know it's.
We better take that offline.
I suppose.
All right. Well, much love to you, Mike, and all our audience out there.